Hey guys, it's Kira and today is January the 3rd. It's a Friday and it is the first Friday of 2020, so it's a whole new decade, a new year, and if you like, it was a new start, I guess. But rather than looking forwards like most people are with like resolutions and goals and things like that, I thought I would take this opportunity to do a little bit of a throwback video, and I'm going to be talking all about some of the books that I loved when I was younger, because recently I've seen quite a few people do these videos where they like go back and reread childhood favourites, and I think those videos are so much fun because, let's be honest, who doesn't love a bit of nostalgia? It's always really fun to go back and reread old favourites, especially ones that you read when you were so much younger, just to see how you feel about those books, like reading them so much further in the future. But recently I saw Meg from Meg with Books do one of these videos, and her video definitely inspired me to try and do one of my own, just because I've seen lots of people do these videos, but I think like Books and Lala does a series with it which is really popular, and her videos are great, but of course she is based in Canada, and so when I was like watching her videos I didn't necessarily find myself relating to or recognising the books that she talked about, whereas with Meg, who's based in England, she talked about some authors and books that I also had read and loved when I was younger, so it just made me really want to delve back into my own bookshelves and see some of the books that I absolutely adored when I was growing up. Now, of course, I'll pop a link in the description below to both Meg and Lala's videos, because both of them have brilliant videos looking back at their childhood favourites, but I've decided I'm not going to just do this as a normal reading vlog, because you know me, I love a 24-hour readathon, like they're just my favourite thing, clearly. So I thought I might as well take this opportunity not only to reminisce and look back at some of my old childhood favourite books, but also to try and see how many of them I can read in one 24-hour period. So that is exactly what we're going to be doing today. So in front of me I've got a pile of 5 childhood favourites that I'm hoping to read over the next 24 hours. If by some miracle I manage to finish all of them, then I'll figure out which ones to read next, but for now I'm just going to be focusing on those 5, and I've kind of gone for a bit of a range. So I've picked 2 that were ones that I would have read when I was quite a bit younger, probably like in primary school, then the other 3 are ones that I would have read when I was like getting a little bit older and maybe in like the earlier stages of high school. So I've gone for a little bit of a range, but the first one I'm going to be reading is an author who I love so much, and I feel like her works definitely defined my childhood and were the books that I read the most, and I didn't want to just focus on her today because I read quite a few authors, but this author in particular was one that I just think is iconic, and for most people in England growing up who liked reading, they will definitely love this author's work as well. She's of course Jacqueline Wilson, and the book I've decided to read for this one is Love Lessons, just because this is one that I seem to remember being quite controversial. Jacqueline Wilson in general does a lot of controversial topics, and I think that's why I loved her book so much, because they were always so like interesting. They just dealt with so many interesting and quite dark topics oftentimes, but this one in particular is one that basically focuses on a relationship between a student and teacher, which I think is very interesting, and I'd be like very intrigued to see how I react to it now looking at it as an adult versus how I would have read it when I was in like, you know, primary school or high school whenever I read this book when I was a lot younger. So I'm really looking forward to getting into this one and seeing how I feel about it now. But it's just before 8 o'clock in the evening, or rather it's just after 8 o'clock in the evening, and I'm going to be starting my reading at 8:30, so I'm just going to go and quickly make a hot drink. And seeing as we're doing a sort of video that's all about childhood favourites, I thought I might as well want to make one of my favourite childhood drinks, which is of course a epic hot chocolate topped with marshmallows, obviously vegan marshmallows, and some vegan whipped cream. So I'm going to go and make that now, and then I'll catch up with you when I start reading. So it's 9 o'clock, I've been reading for about half an hour, and I've managed to make it through 50 pages of Love Lessons so far, and damn, Jacqueline Wilson did not hold back with the start of this book. It gets off to a very dramatic start. I feel like because it's obviously a like children and like teenagers book type thing, it's obviously quite short. I think it's only got like 250 pages altogether. So obviously we're typically in like an older YA book or like an adult book where there's more pages to fill with story, there's a bit more like of a slow paced introduction, whereas because this is a shorter story altogether, it's just kind of gone straight in there and hit you with action straight away, which I am enjoying because it's making it a really like sort of easy book to get into. But basically, as I mentioned, it's a book that follows a girl who ends up basically having a relationship with her teacher in a way. But basically it starts off following this girl called Prue, who is, I thought she was 16. It actually turns out that she's 14, which makes the subject matter of this book kind of even more disturbing. But basically Prue and her younger sister Grace are homeschooled by her dad, who's very like, I guess like overbearing, very strict. They don't have a TV. He's very sort of controlling of them and their mum as well. And then one day her dad becomes ill and has a stroke, and so for that reason she ends up having to go to school, and that's kind of where the story kicks off. But yeah, I'm looking forward to getting further into it and seeing how this relationship develops. Obviously I am familiar with the story having read it before, but it's been so long and I can't believe I didn't remember that she was only 14, because that just makes this even worse. But yeah, enjoying the book so far, and I'll catch up with you when I've read a little bit more. Oh, Jesus, I do not know what's wrong with me. But I feel like every time I do a 24-hour readathon, I feel fine when I get started, and then I get sat in this exact position on the sofa, and then I just start drifting off, and before I know it, Jay is like prodding me awake because I'm already falling asleep, and it's only like 9:30 in the evening. I'm still enjoying this book though, about 120 pages in now, so I've got just over 100 pages left to go, but I think I might need to go downstairs and get a cup of tea just to kind of like wake myself up a bit. But so far it's definitely an interesting book, and it's starting to get into the sort of main plot now of the romance, so I'll catch up with you when anything particularly traumatizing happens, because I have a feeling I'm going to be really like grossed out by what is going to happen, but we'll see. So it's about 11:30 and clearly my naps slowed me down a little bit, but I have now just finished reading Love Lessons, which was definitely an interesting reading experience. Obviously, as I said, it deals with that subject of a like forbidden teacher-pupil romance, but in hindsight I feel like it doesn't necessarily deal with it in a very good way. Basically, obviously we've got this main character Prue, who is like definitely a vulnerable young person. She's obviously new to the school environment, having been homeschooled for most of her life, and also once she gets into the school environment she doesn't really fit in and is kind of like ostracized by the people in her class as well as by some of the other teachers. And so you can obviously understand how someone like her could then quite easily become a little bit obsessed with a teacher who shows her some interest and is really nice to her. However, what I find an issue with is the way that the like character of the teacher, her art teacher, Mr. Rexbury, or as the people call him in the book, Rex, basically like says that he's like in love with her and as the book develops and everything, and that just seems very bizarre to me, because the book never really addresses the fact that she is like a victim in this situation, because although she definitely pursues him, it doesn't address the fact that she's a child and her sort of the way that she deals with it should be very different from the way that him as a teacher deals with it, and it never actually addresses the fact that that's wrong, particularly because at the end of the book like she ends up moving schools, but the teacher gets to stay as a teacher, and the head teacher even notes that if she was someone else she could pursue it and get him sort of suspended and things like that, but she decides not to. And I think it's very strange that the book doesn't actually deal with the fact that this is actually sort of a very wrong situation. And yes, that was kind of strange, and I had a feeling I would feel like this about this book, like going back in it, because I feel like when you're younger you don't necessarily notice those like nuances, because probably when I read this the first time I was even younger than the main character, so I probably didn't even realise how like bizarre the situation was. But now I'm very much kind of like disturbed by the fact that it doesn't even address how wrong the situation was. but it was a book that was an interesting read for sure, and I'm glad to have like reread it because it's been so long since I picked up any Jacqueline Wilson books. So I think I mentioned it's now about 11:30, so I'm gonna go and grab a cup of tea to try and like perk myself up a bit. Then the next book I'm going to read is by another author who I read a lot of when I was younger. So obviously Jacqueline Wilson, as I said, was the like best author in my opinion when I was younger. She was the one who I read the most books of. But then another author who I really enjoyed was Kathy Cassidy, and the first book of hers that I picked up was probably my favourite, and that was one of the books I had that basically was like falling apart because I'd read it so many times, and that is Dizzy. This is actually not the cover that it was when I was younger. That was like a pink cover. I'll see if I can find a picture to pop somewhere on the screen because I much prefer the original cover, but they've obviously been updated in the many years that have passed since I obviously first read it. But this was one of my all-time favourites, so I'm really looking forward to getting into this one. Okay, so I've not been reading for much longer. I'm only about like 25 pages into this book so far, but I'm already loving it so much. But I just thought I'd share because I thought it was kind of funny. Basically, this book is about a girl called Dizzy who her mum basically left when she was like 4 years old, and since then she's only really heard from her on her birthday every year. Then it's her, I think, 12th birthday, and instead of just getting a letter or a present from her mum like normal, her mum basically just like turns up. And all these years where her mum's been sending her presents and things on her birthday, her mum's basically been like a travelling hippie, and she kind of just like left to travel the world and left Dizzy with her dad. But I just thought it was kind of funny because this book was written in 2004, and I kind of like obviously knew that it was about her mum who was kind of like a hippie and a traveller, but I couldn't really remember like the super fine details. But when her mum, who goes by the name of Storm, turns up at her house on her 12th birthday, she's in like a van that's all decked out to live in. And obviously this book was written quite a while ago, but I just thought it was kind of funny because along with BookTube, which I obviously watch a lot of, one of the other things I love to watch on YouTube is like van life people who've basically like completely renovated vans so that they can travel and live in them. And I just thought it was kind of funny that this was one of my favourite books when I was younger, and it has that little theme in it as well. And even now, so many years later, that's also something I'm still interested in. So I just thought that was a funny little anecdote that I just thought was a nice little addition to this reading experience. But I'm just going to carry on reading, just thought I'd give you a little update. So it's almost 1 AM, and as you can tell from my hardly open eyes, I'm really struggling to stay awake, and I'm so tired. I'm about 90 pages into Dizzy so far, and I'm absolutely loving this book. I just love the setting of like these hippie focused like travellers and festivals and everything. Absolutely love it, and I'm just under halfway in now, so I've got a little bit more left to read. But on account of how tired I am and how often I'm falling asleep, I'm gonna head to bed, get a few hours sleep, and then catch up with this one first thing in the morning. So it's just gone 7:30 in the morning, and I've just finished up with my read of Dizzy, which was so good. I'm so glad I reread this one because this is exactly what I was thinking about when I said I wanted to do some nostalgic rereads. But of course it's still quite early in the morning, so I'll give you a full update on my thoughts on this one once everyone in the house is awake and it's a little bit more light outside. But for now, I'm just going to get straight away started on my next book, which is going to be Angus Thongs and Full Frontal Snogging by Louise Renison. So we finally have some daylight, so I thought I'd give you a little bit of an update on my thoughts on Dizzy, because as I said, I really enjoyed the reading experience of this one. It felt so nostalgic and just reminded me why I enjoyed it so much when I was younger, because I still enjoyed it so much now. I just think it's such a great book because it's obviously only about 250 pages long, but it manages to do so many things in those short amount of pages. You've got like family drama, romance, new friendships, and just like sort of personal development, which always makes for a great book. But then I think that just the like setting and theme of the story as well just make for such a great book, in my opinion anyway, just because obviously it's set around this theme of a young girl who ends up going travelling for the summer with her mum, but it's kind of around all of these like nature-based hippie festivals festivals. It's set in like rural Scotland for the majority of the book, and I just think that Kathy Cassidy does an amazing job of like portraying the like natural surroundings and just creating this really like vivid imagery of these festivals and all of these like very eclectic mixes of people that would have been there. And I just think it just makes for a really fun read, and I certainly enjoyed it. So I'm super glad that I picked this one up again because it was so nostalgic. And although I didn't keep my original copy of this book, I think I'll definitely be keeping this version just because I absolutely love the story so much, and I definitely want to sort of like revisit it again in the future, just because it's always nice when you've got a book that just means so much and is just like such a firm favourite. But yeah, I really enjoyed rereading this one, and I have now made a start on Angus Thongs and Full Frontal Snogging, which I'm looking forward to because both Kathy Cassidy and Jacqueline Wilson do books that are kind of a lot more issues focused, which is something that I did really enjoy when I was younger. But there were also another type of story that I enjoyed, which is more like this one, which is certainly a lot more like light-hearted and just like fun in their storytelling style. This book is a lot more light-hearted. It basically focuses on a girl called Georgia who is like 14 or 15, and it's written in diary format. She's basically just like a typical teenage girl, where the book kind of just focuses on her like family issues, how much she hates the fact that her parents don't give her any freedom, her kind of like issues around self-image, and mostly it also focuses on her sort of romantic pursuits. But it is just written in a very like funny and relatable way that just sort of reminds me of kind of being that age and kind of like thoughts and feelings and things that probably felt like they were much bigger issues at the age when you were like 14 or 15, but now are just kind of like funny to look back on. So I think this is going to be a very fun experience to read, but I'm only just getting started, so I'm probably going to grab some breakfast soon, and then I will catch up with you with some more thoughts later on. Okay, so I've just had breakfast and it is now about 9:35, so basically I've got just under 12 hours left of the readathon, but I'm about 100 pages now into Angus Thongs and Full Frontal Snogging, and all I have to say about this book is that it's absolutely comedy genius. It's also really making me want to re-watch the movie Angus Thongs and Perfect Snogging because I used to love that film so much. I think it was amazing, and it also had a brilliant soundtrack to sort of add to the funniness of it, which was great. But the one thing I will say about this book is that you can definitely tell that it's dated, although it's fun to look back on, and it's definitely like quite a like relatable reminiscence about like what it was like to be a teenager and everything. There's definitely some references in there, and the way that it refers to certain topics, particularly things like mental health and stuff, and the way that it kind of makes like some kind of like throwaway comments about things like that, are definitely things that you wouldn't find in a like YA book today. But obviously this book is quite a few years old. I'm not even sure when it was published. I think, gosh, it was quite a while ago. Yeah, 1999, so this is quite an old book in the realm of YA and everything like that, so you can understand why some of the references are older, but I am really enjoying this reading experience. However, Jay and I are just heading out to Sainsbury's because when I was reading Dizzy, it mentioned cakes, brownies, and like chocolate fudge and everything so many times. That was one of the things I enjoyed about the book so much, is that food is such a big part of it and it describes it so vividly. However, it's really made me want to do some baking, so I think I'm going to make some Lotus Biscoff vegan brownies later on today, so we're just going to go and get the ingredients for that now. Okay, so we just got back from Sainsbury's, got all the ingredients I need for baking later, and we're just about to head out for a walk just so that we don't spend all day sitting inside. But I just got back to a parcel which feels like a book. I've not ordered any books and it's got a handwritten address, so I thought I'd open it on camera because why not? Ooh. Oh, lovely. Oh, this looks interesting. So it's called The Hunting Party. The theme is everyone's invited, everyone's a suspect. This looks like, ooh, it's set in a remote hunting lodge in the Scottish wilderness, and it's basically like An Accident or a Murder Among Friends. Ooh, that sounds cool. And it is from my friend Grace, who is basically someone who I do quite a few book swaps with on Instagram, and the last one that she sent me was Adele, which I read before Christmas, and I didn't actually end up enjoying that, so she said that she'd send me one that she rated a 5-star on account of how much neither of us particularly enjoyed Adele. So thank you so much, Grace. I'm so excited to read this because I'm really loving mysteries at the moment. But for now, back to childhood favourites and heading out for a walk before getting on with some more reading. So we've just gotten back from our walk, which turned out to be a little bit more of a palaver than we first anticipated, because basically we just couldn't decide where to go, so we were in the car for ages driving around and umming and ahhing, but we eventually went to Roundhay Park. But because we ended up in the car for so long, I actually ended up finishing off reading Angus Thongs and Full Frontal Snogging whilst we were driving around, which is great because I've now finished 3 books. This one was just a generally like fun and light-hearted read. It was a really like, yeah, just an easy one to get through. I definitely enjoyed it. The only slight problem with it for me was that basically it ends on kind of like not a cliffhanger, because it's not that type of book, but it's basically part of a long series. I think there's at least like 4 or 5 books in the series, and it kind of just goes straight into the next one. So now I'm kind of tempted to continue on with the series, even though I have read them before, just because it was really fun and I definitely enjoyed it. So who knows, I might end up picking up the next one. But for now, I'm moving on to another one, which happens to be a diary style book as well. And this is one that I cannot wait to get into. This is a series that I don't think was as popular as the other 3 books that I've picked up so far, but that is Diary of a Chav by Grace Dent, which I just am so obsessed with. This again is a book that has like this is the first one in the series, but I think there's like 4 following books, and I've read them all so many times, but I think this was a really fun book. It basically follows a girl called Shiraz, who is from Essex, and she kind of like considers herself to fall into that category of being a chav, but she's kind of like quite intelligent. She's going to 6th form and things like that, and I feel like it's kind of like her trying to figure out her way in the world, even though maybe she's not necessarily from a particularly affluent family. But it's just, again, a really fun book, so I'm looking forward to getting into this one. However, I think I'm going to get started on my baking because I'm really looking forward to some chocolate brownies, especially because I'm going to put in loads of Lotus Biscoff spread, which kind of is also a childhood reminiscence, because when I was younger, me and my mum and my sister would just literally eat it from the jar because it's that good. So I'm going to go make some of them, do some reading, and I will catch up with you later on. So my brownies are just baking, but clearly, as well as being a 24-hour readathon, this is also a video of unboxings, because another parcel has arrived, which again clearly feels like a book, and I haven't ordered any, so I'll just see what we've got. Ooh! This is one I'm looking forward to. So the book is Educated by Tara Westover, which is basically, I think it's a memoir, so it's not like fully fictional, but it is like written in story format. And it's basically about this woman, or who was originally obviously a girl, who grew up in a family that was preparing for the apocalypse. And so because of that, she was like off-grid, and her parents didn't like register for her and stuff like that, and basically she was like off record completely. And then I think as she gets older, she kind of goes on her own kind of like learning journey and stuff, because she kind of leaves this like weird childhood that she's had behind her, which sounds really interesting. And it is from Mary, who I will link in the description below, because she has an amazing channel and she's just absolutely lovely. But thank you so much, Mary, because I'm really excited to read this one, so thank you so much. Reading now for a little while, and I've obviously had some lunch, and I'm about 50 pages into Diary of a Chav so far, and I think for sure this book is definitely going to win the award for the funniest book I read today, because just the way that this one is written and the like protagonist like narrative style and everything is just so funny. It's another one that's kind of similar to Angus and Full Frontal Snogging in the sense that it's just kind of like a diary, and unlike Kathy Cassidy and Jacqueline Wilson, there's no like major event and it's not really an issue focused book, but it's kind of just like going about her everyday life, but it's kind of the way that she like muses on her everyday life that just makes it a really, really amusing book. And I think this one is definitely going to be the funniest one that I read today. But I've just got myself a slice of the Biscoff brownie and I've had a little taste of it and it tastes amazing. I think I still didn't wait quite long enough because it was a little bit crumbly still, but that doesn't really matter because as long as it tastes good, that's all that counts. So I'm just going to do some reading, eat my brownie and have a lovely afternoon. So it's just turned 4 o'clock, which means I've got 4.5 hours left of reading time, and I just finished up reading Diary of a Chav, which obviously I feel like I've said this about all the books I've read today, but I really, really enjoyed reading this one. And I think partially that's just because it's really hard not to enjoy reading something that you have such like good memories of when it was such a favourite when you were so much younger and that kind of thing. And obviously the nostalgia definitely helps to make it a really enjoyable experience. But this one in general was so funny and I just enjoyed reading it so much. I think this book is absolute comedy gold and I definitely would love to read the following ones in the series as well, because I seem to remember the second and third books of the series were my favourites, or maybe it was the second and fourth, but either way it's a really great series and I certainly really enjoyed reading it. That is book number 4 for this readathon finished, and then the next and probably last book that I'm going to end up picking up today is one that I absolutely love. I think I've talked about this on this channel so many times before because this is a book that I would say definitely is one of like the defining books of like my sort of like teenage reading journey. It's probably a book that I think I read for the first time maybe when I was about 14 years old, and so I loved it sort of around that age but have continued to love it ever since, and that is The Perks of Being a Wallflower by Stephen Chbosky, which is obviously a very popular book. I'm sure a lot of people have read this book, a lot more people than probably have read the other books I've talked about in this 24-hour readathon. But yeah, this is one that I have loved for so long and I think I'll always love this book just because I find it so meaningful and it's just a really, really great story. So I thought this would be a perfect one to include today and probably to finish off this readathon with. But for now I'm probably going to go and grab a cup of tea and then get cozy and start reading. So it's about 6 o'clock and I'm about halfway through The Perks of Being a Wallflower. I think it's got about 230 pages altogether and I've just reached page 115. And of course it's no secret that this is one of my favourite books of all time, so I don't really need to tell you how much I'm enjoying it. But I thought I would give a quick mention to a couple of the things that I think make this book so enjoyable for me. So the first one is the fact that Charlie, the protagonist, mentions how obsessed he is with the song Asleep by the Smiths so many times throughout this book, which I just think is a really fun detail. Firstly because I also love that song and I just think it's great that it has such a feature in this book, but then secondly just because in general I feel like it's really relatable for someone to just like get super hooked on a song, because at least that's what I do. I always get obsessed with a song and then play it over and over and over and over again until I find the next song to get obsessed with. So I just feel like that's kind of like a little detail that just makes the character really like sort of more realistic and relatable. And then another thing that he said, which I think is relatable in general but particularly to me today, is I actually folded the page so I could get that quote, was oh yeah, so it's quite early on in the book, but it's something that gets mentioned a few times, and he basically says, "I finished To Kill a Mockingbird. It's now my favourite book of all time, but then again, I always think that until I read another book." And I feel like I am definitely that type of person because I wouldn't necessarily describe myself as a critical reader. Most of the time I just really enjoy books, but when I find a book that I enjoy, I just get really obsessed with it, kind of like the same as I do with songs like I just mentioned. But I think today is a good example of that as well, because although I've enjoyed all of the books, I'm like, oh my god, this book is so good, this one's so good. And I just feel like when you're sort of sucked into the world of a new book, it can be so easy to forget about some of the other books you've read, just because when you get into a good book it's so good that you kind of just forget about everything else. So I thought that was another fun thing that I really enjoyed. But I feel like it's kind of gotten dark really quickly. It's about 6 PM now, so I'm going to quickly get in the shower to try and like re-energise myself, and then I'll probably grab some dinner and carry on So it's just about 8:20, which means that I've got about 10 minutes left until the readathon is officially over. But I just finished up with book number 5, Perks of Being a Wallflower, which is obviously going to be my final read for this like childhood favourites 24-hour readathon, which means I read a total of 5 books, which I'm absolutely like so happy with, because that is definitely the most amount of books I've read in a 24-hour readathon. Granted, obviously these were childhood books and so they were a lot shorter, but still, I read 5 books in one day, which I think is a pretty great achievement, and I read a total of 1,175 pages, which again is a bloody brilliant achievement. So I'm always super happy with how these 24-hour readathons go, just because they really push me, and I feel like they kind of do give you a bit more of an insight into what it's like when you're younger, because obviously like the further you get into adulthood, the busier you are, and like on a typical day I don't always prioritize reading because there's always so many other things going on. But on these 24-hour readathons I can kind of just like go back to what it was like when you were younger, because I just like make reading the main priority and I just kind of chill out and do as much reading as I can, which is obviously what I did a lot of the time when I was younger. So I do feel like it was really great to take that time to read some old favourites, and I managed to read plenty of pages, which is brilliant too. But I'm kind of struggling to decide which of the books I read today is my favourite. Obviously, objectively, Perks is probably my favourite of the books that I've read, just because, as I said, it's one that's not just a favourite because I have an emotional connection to it, but it's just one that I think is a brilliant book, and I enjoy the story and everything that it explores, and I just think it's something that I'll never get tired of. However, I'd also like to give a special mention to 2 of the other books, because there were 2 that I enjoyed rereading but I probably didn't like, you know, enjoy as much as the other ones, but 3 of the books I think were really special. Obviously Perks of Being a Wallflower is one of them. Then I think on a like nostalgia level for like childhood books, I'd say Dizzy would have to be my favourite, probably because this is the book that I would have read of the ones that I read today for the first time when I was like the youngest. I was probably like less than 10 probably when I picked this book up for the first time, so this is like a proper childhood favourite for me, which means I just think it was a really nice thing to revisit because it has been so many years since I last picked it up. And the other one I'd like to mention as a fave is Diary of a Chav, because this was just so funny and I had kind of forgotten how amazing I thought this series was, but I'm so glad to have revisited it because it was just such a fun reading experience. I think it's a very unique book, and probably something that's definitely very specific to a British reading audience, because I don't necessarily think this would have the same effect if you weren't from England or Britain, but I absolutely loved it, so I'm really glad to have reread this today. So with that being said, I've obviously had an amazing time doing this 24-hour readathon. Obviously 24-hour readathons in general are always really fun, but this one in particular was so much fun just because it was really nice to take that time to look back at my old favourites and to just get nostalgic and just enjoy looking back at some of the memories and seeing how I felt about these books now that so much time has passed. So let me know in the comments below if you've read any of the books that I read today, because I'd love to hear your thoughts about them. And if not, like, what kind of books did you read when you were younger? Has your reading taste changed or anything like that? Because it's just so much fun to think about those things. I still think I read similar types of books and I'm drawn to similar types of books just that are marketed for an older audience, because clearly with Jacqueline Wilson and Kathy Cassidy I enjoyed reading like issues focused contemporary books that had a like sort of basis in realism, and even today I still think those are the books that I'm most drawn to and find myself enjoying the most. So although obviously my reading taste has like aged, the like themes and stuff have kind of stayed the same, which I think is really interesting. So let me know if you've had a complete change in reading taste or if yours is the same from when you were younger. So I really hope you've enjoyed thinking about all of the books that you might have enjoyed when you were younger and hearing my thoughts on the ones I read when I was younger as well. Thanks for watching, I'll see you next time.